Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Hangout on Air. My name is Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and this is a Center Hangout on Air. I'm the community coordinator here at the Center, and if this is the first time you're joining us here in the Center, welcome, welcome, welcome. The Center is a next-generation online learning community that was designed to bring together California's awesome 112 community colleges to help us connect and learn from one another and improve innovation and sharing along the way. All of our events here at the Center are free and open to everyone in the world, however, so we're hoping that lots of people will be joining in and listening and sharing and asking questions. This Hangout on Air is being broadcast publicly via YouTube, and we do have the Q&A feature activated through Google+. So if you are watching through Google+, you can click on the Submit a Question link and ask questions during the Hangout today, and we certainly hope that you do that along the way. And we have two fabulous guests here today. The topic of our Hangout today is active learning with Google Drive, tips and strategies. And this is going to be a very dynamic Hangout. Because we have an interactive demo actually scheduled for the Hangout, and we did something pretty interactive in our last Hangout and it went really well, so I'm excited that we're going to be able to do something interactive this time too. And to make that happen, we have Kelly Falcone from Palomar College and Gregory Beyrer from Cosumnes River College here to share with us. And I'm going to give each of them just a moment to say hello and introduce themselves to you. Gregory, would you like to go first?
Sure. My name is Gregory Beyrer. I'm the Distance Education Coordinator at Cosumnes River College. I also, on an overload basis, teach history, and I teach a class on how to be a successful online student. In our district, we're part of the Los Rios district. We have 4 colleges, and we have been a Google Apps domain member for a couple of years now. And I had previously been using Google Apps with my coworkers, as well as for my students for several years.
Great. We're excited to hear from you and to understand. Greg is going to be sharing kind of some of the advantages and maybe even some challenges, which is kind of interesting to think about, of what it means to have that apps domain. So I think it's going to be very interesting to hear your perspective along the way. And Kelly Falcone is here from Palomar College, who is in the heart of North San Diego County, right?
Yes.
Yes, and so we extend our sincerest empathies to you and everyone around you. I know that there's just a terrible amount of firestorms going on, and so we're happy that you are safe, and we hope you stay that way, Kelly, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, we're in the middle of this crazy firestorm, but all seems to be okay around the college, so I'm pretty happy about that. I teach at Palomar College in San Marcos, California. I teach health and kinesiology. I've always been someone really focused on how to engage students more, and I love technology. So today I'll be talking about how I use Google Drive, specifically Google Presentations, to create collaborative presentations with my students as another way to increase collaboration and engagement and hopefully get them to enjoy class time.
I'm already excited. I have goosebumps. I'm such a geek. I'm serious. I'm listening to you guys, and I think history and kinesiology and science, and technology. This is so cool. And I think that what gets me really excited was when I hear the idea of collaborative presentations, because typically when you hear about presentations in higher education, we have this vision of, death by PowerPoint. And so you're using presentations as a way to bring your students in and actually have them create what is shown up on the big screen, right? Is that basically where we're going with this?
Absolutely. I love that you just said death by PowerPoint.
That's so cool. And I think that that idea of having a room full of students, I mean, maybe tell me what you folks think about this. I've worked with a lot of faculty over the years, and I think that that can be kind of a scary thought to make that transition, right? Because when you are a professor, an instructor, I mean, your content, your presentation, your slides, that's your plan. So when your plan is going to transition from this kind of pre-scripted thing into this very open-ended, spontaneous project, artwork, I don't know, you know, improvisation, because you're doing this, you're talking about in a face-to-face class, right?
Yes.
Is where you do this.
Uh-huh.
I mean, was that a leap for you to take, Kelly, or was that just kind of like in you to start and something you felt like you had to do?
Oh, no, it was definitely a leap. I
Yeah.
think, you know, when I started teaching college, I fell directly into the safe teaching mode. Like you said, having control. Set up your PowerPoint lectures ahead of time. You know exactly where they're going. Then I started introducing a few more things to take a little bit of the control off. So, for instance, doing breaking up into groups in the classroom and giving them poster boards to draw on and then present the poster board. And so I think that was the intermediate step to then saying, oh, well, how can I do this using technology? You know, I do teach health, and part of that is environmental wellness, so I try not to waste too much paper. So I thought, how can I do this where I'm actually using technology instead? So that got me into using it, but you know, there still is, like you said, you lose that control. So I like that you just said improv. It is kind of like improv.
Yeah.
You know, I think you have to get rid of the fear of failure, you know, and allow yourself to make mistakes and go with the flow just as life does. And be able to laugh things off when they don't go the way that you want them to go, and realize that no matter what, it's still a learning experience, and it's still an experience that they participated in. So I know that they already got more out of it than falling half asleep listening to me speak.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah, that's great. And Kelly, how big are your classes that you do this in?
I teach a class of 30 in an active learning classroom with rolling chairs. And so that classroom, it's very easy to do this because they can move. I also teach in a 100-person stadium seating lecture hall. That one's a little bit more of a challenge, but I can still get it to work, and the students still group up even though it is fixed chairs, fixed tables, stadium seating. So I've used it in several different classroom architectures.
Okay, so I've got one more question just about logistics before we kind of get into what it is that you're going to show us. And I hope I'm not getting into your presentation.
Oh,
but
no.
I just want to kind of lay some of the foundation, because I know you've got some slides you want to take us through. But talk to us about, I know that some people are wondering what the students need in terms of technology to make this happen. So you've got students in a classroom. What devices, or what does the room have to be equipped with, as well as what devices do the students need to actually be able to participate, and how do you make that work?
So, well, they need to have Wi-Fi. So, you know, at our campus, we have an open Wi-Fi network that works really well most of the time. So you have to have Wi-Fi. Other than that, they do need a device. And I found that typically at least 50% of my students have a device. So when I do this activity, I do put them in groups. And I do try to put it to where every group has at least one person in it with a laptop. I do find that laptops work better than tablets when you're using the presentations in Google Drive. If they're using a document, the tablets seem to be fine. It just seems to be an issue on presentations.
Okay.
So I do try to then put them in groups where there's at least one person with a laptop. My students know I use technology, so at the beginning of the class there may be 25% with a device, and it definitely increases because they know to bring them.
Okay, great. So why don't you show us some of I think you've got some slides that you want to take us through, and talk to us a little bit about, you know, some of the thoughts and theory behind what it is that we're talking about.
Sure.
And then we'll get into the fun stuff for those who are viewing, the lucky folks who are tuning in live today.
All right. Let's see. So this, what I wanted to bring you was just how I use Google Drive, and more specifically how I use Google Presentations to have my entire class collaborate on one presentation during class. This really stems from my belief that, I like to create classrooms that are engaging, that are student-centered versus teacher-oriented. I look at the difference between using that, as you said before, Michelle, the death by PowerPoint. So versus setting up a PowerPoint and me controlling and driving the entire class versus allowing the students to collaboratively put together a presentation that we then use to learn all the content. And kind of looking at the difference between pedagogy and andragogy, I teach at the California Community College. I have adult learners. I know that they bring a lot of knowledge to the classroom that I would like them to be able to share with everybody. So I look at them as being the knowledge constructors, being self-directed, and able to participate in class in that way. So I know that most of our audience is probably adult learners, and they have a lot to contribute as well. So what I'd like to have everybody do is open another window and go to this tiny URL address where I've set up a presentation to where all of our viewers right now can simultaneously collaborate on a presentation about the tech tools they use and just about Google Apps in education. So the tiny URL is listed right here at the bottom. It's tinyurl.com/KU4NVEZ.
And let's leave that up for just a minute. Yeah, why don't you leave that up on the screen for just a minute, because I think it's probably going to take folks a little while. And if any of you are viewing the video on the event page, I am going to paste that link into a comment on the event page. So those of you who are watching the video can just refer to that too. Okay, so that's there. All right, great. So hopefully we're going to have some folks start to edit that and read the slides and respond to Kelly's great prompts on that presentation. I'm excited to see what happens. And so I think maybe what we'll do now is turn things over to, can you folks hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I had my mic on mute there for a minute. I want to be sure it wasn't still on mute. I'm going to turn things over to Greg here. And Greg, why don't you and I have a little chat about when I have the presentation URL up on my screen there, if you folks missed it there. I know I'm running out of space for my face, it seems now, but why don't you and I have a little chat now about what it's like to have your own apps domain, because Kelly and I come from this experience of teaching without an apps domain, and so that's all we know. And so when we sit down and we work with Google Apps, I mean, one of the things that we love is that we can share them publicly, we can share them privately, or we can share them with we can share them publicly, we can share them privately, or we can share them with anyone who has the link, right? Yeah. That's what Google refers to it as.
And you can also pick individuals to share it with.
Okay, right. So that would be the privately, right? But that has to be done with an email address, and that's something that I purposely always avoid as a teacher, because you have all these different email addresses for students, and anyway, it's difficult. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about what it's like to have an apps domain, and what's how it's different, and what some of the benefits are, and let's just kind of have that conversation.
Yeah, I will do. I want to ask Kelly though a question if I can. Because I haven't yet done what you're doing in my history class, and I'm going to probably do it this fall coming up.
Yeah.
And that is, what's been your experience, the ideal number of students in a group?
Oh, that's a good question. I usually put 4 in a group. I try to. But when I have my class of 85, I do bigger groups in that class, just because then I would have too many slides. Because typically I set it up to where I will have a slide already pre-designated for each of the groups.
Okay.
And so if I did groups of 4 in the 85-person class, I would have a lot of slides being made. So I have gone back and forth between doing groups of 4. I've gone up all the way to groups of 8. It also kind of depends on the topic that we're doing as well.
Okay, thank you. I think that's, yeah, I'm fascinated.
Greg, I need to address one question that we just got from, I think it's Noah Leah. I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, but I can't actually type. There is no chat within Google+. What you have is an opportunity to type questions in, but there is no way for us to type into that area. So I am unable to type into that area to you. So the question that you just asked is not a question that I can respond to, but the URL is on my screen right now, if you can see it there. And if you could just write that down, it's tinyurl.com/ku4nvez. So I'll leave that up again. And I know there's a little bit of a delay with the folks who are watching right now. So maybe I can leave that up for one more second. And if you're watching through the Google event, I also typed it in as a comment. So if you look in the comments feed on the Google event, it's there as well. Okay, so hopefully folks have it by now. Oh, and someone just submitted it as a question. Was that you, Kelly? Or someone else did. Song did. Song Sue, you were our smart one. Okay, good deal. We're set. I love it. We're working together. Okay. Sorry about that, Greg.
No problem. So we, as I mentioned before, we've been using Google Apps domain for a year, maybe a couple of years. And one of the things that I really like about it as an instructor is that when I am sharing some asset within Google with my students, I know exactly who is getting it and who has access to it. This is when I'm picking the individuals to share it with, and I know exactly who the individuals are. I also know that the access to Google won't be a problem, and the reason is that because we use a Google domain, we have the same username and password for our student registration system, for our learning management system. Our students get a Gmail account, so that's their student email system. And so from an instructor's perspective, I have to spend less time worrying about the technology itself and especially the user access to the technology. And that's one of the things that I try to be aware of, both on my students' behalf and also when I'm working with instructors at my college. I want the technology to be as easy as possible for them to use so that they can spend their time being creative and learning and teaching and all that stuff, and less having to worry about what their usernames and passwords are. And so that, for me, is the chief advantage of having an apps domain, is that the provision of users is handled. We handle it. Our IT staff at our district office somehow sets that up where they communicate with Google directly, so that the usernames and the passwords gets. I know there are a couple of different ways to do that, it's nice also that Google maintains the hardware, and I know that was a concern for our IT management, because we used to have a homegrown student email system that the hardware was getting old, and so part of the decision for us to switch to Google domain was the idea that Google would be managing the storage, right, for the they give gigabytes and gigabytes to every user. And then again, it's easy to share, and that's something we have with Google, and because we are because we have the domain, I can pick the users to do that. In terms of the challenges, I think that's the biggest challenge for someone who has a lot of experience with Google on my own is not every Google tool is available within an apps domain.
Right.
And the decision for, so someone has to, there's a control panel in an apps domain, and someone gets to decide, there's just a series of switches, turn on and turn off, right, which tools are available. For the people who care about things like terms of service, there's a pretty explicit difference between the terms of service for the core apps. And Michelle, I can show this anytime. I can switch over and start showing stuff.
Yeah, go ahead and do that. I mean, I think I know that our audience likes to see stuff too. Yeah. So, and we already have a question from someone who's interested. If you can speak at all to how much it costs. I don't know if that's something that you're involved in. If you can address that question?
It's free. It's free from Google to all educational users. They do have, so the technology from the Google side for Google Apps for an education is very similar to Google Apps for business, but the difference is that for education it's free. And they provide an unlimited number of users, and each user gets, I can't remember, it's 15 gigabytes. No, I think it's 30 gigabytes of space per user. And one of the options, so here's an example of a question that, depending if you're a business user or if you're an educational user, you might have different answers, is the individual users in Google Apps each get 30 gigabytes of space, but it's a choice at the control panel whether we allow our individual users to purchase additional space. So I know, for example, my own personal Google account, I can purchase additional space if I want to. So I have a screen. I'm showing you what I see when I log in. This is what all of our users see when we log into Los Rios Google domain. And the core apps that are included in the thing are the ones I'm showing: Gmail, Drive, Sites, and Calendar. We also have Google Groups and Contacts. We have those kind of sort of deprecated on our homepage because we don't use those that much. But what you'll notice here, what's not appearing on this page, what we don't have access to are Blogger, YouTube, Google+, Google Talk, and any of the other, the various Google applications. And one of the reasons why that is the terms of service for those other tools are the commercial terms of service or the personal terms of service, so that when we all go out to Google and we can all get our own free Google accounts, we agree to give Google the ability to aggregate all the data that we provide as we're sending emails and creating sites and participating in Hangouts and stuff.
Right.
And we know that Google uses that data to sell advertising, and they, whatever. That's kind of the deal that we have. As an apps domain, we could decide to turn on those things for our users. In Los Rios, we don't, and I know that there are other institutions that do have different tools turned on. So from the perspective of the challenge side, it is a little bit tough to. It's a little bit tough to be in a position where I'm advocating for technology and I'm advocating for the use of technology by our employees and by our students. And I have experience using technology like what we're doing right now with the Hangout and the Hangouts on Air, but that same technology, it's a little bit harder for us to use internally because, again, we don't have access to this. And then one last thing I'll say that is a decision we made here in Los Rios is the Gmail.
So can I interrupt you for one second? Are you referring to being, and maybe I want to know if this is what you're saying. Are you saying if you were an instructor at an institution that has Google Apps, and let's say, for example, you wanted to have your students, or you were considering, oh gosh, Hangouts would be a really cool thing to use with my students, you're saying that you're kind of in between this weird predicament because it's not included in the suite. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. That's right. So I couldn't, like what we're doing right now, I could not do this on campus. And Song just asked the question: does our college have Google Hangouts enabled for student accounts? No, we don't. We don't.
Right, because that's part of Google Plus. That you would see that up if Google Plus was included in your suite. That's what would be up there, and Hangouts is part of Google Plus, right?
Exactly. So, this is, I don't know how common this is, but it's a little bit. And there's one thing to say, well, we don't have access to a certain tool, so you can use it on your own, or you can make your arrangements with your students, however you do that. It's another thing to say, well, we have access to this tool, but not that part of it. So if you want to be an active user of Google Plus or Google Hangouts or Blogger, then as a Los Rios person, you have to have two Google identities, right? We all have our Los Rios Google identities. That's all there by default because we are a domain user. So I have to maintain a second Google identity, which for me isn't a problem, but that's one of those things where I think I mentioned earlier, I want things to be easier for my instructors, and I especially want things to be easier for our students. So I have to be a little bit more wary of doing that. Ricardo asked a question: can we get access to the collaborative document after the active learning session?
I'm not sure what they mean by access because they already have access to it. So maybe we can get some more clarification about what they mean by access to it, if they want to
Probably
adopt.
meaning will we leave it open, and it'll be left open, so they'll be able to go back to it and add. I will likely turn off editing just because it is open to the world, but you will be able to go back and review what everybody wrote and what everybody added.
And Kelly's going to show you how to do it also.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right, Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, so
Absolutely.
Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere, everybody. Don't go anywhere. Okay, so that's interesting. So what you're talking about there, Greg, is a kind of this, right, so if you have your students, so I'm thinking now, you know, because I do use Hangouts in my online class as an option to connect with my students. So I give them lots of ways to connect with me. One of those ways is if they wish to join a Hangout that I set up, then they can join me in a Hangout. And so that would possibly be one way to extend that option to students, so that way you're not requiring them, but you're still integrating Hangouts in some way as an optional kind of instructor-to-student interaction tool. But I can see how that would create this, but then, you know, you're navigating 2 accounts, and I can see what you mean, how that could be a little bit of an obstacle.
Yeah. And it comes to me, in my view, it comes a lot down to how comfortable the instructor is with the technology. Let me go ahead and show an example, if I can, of the Google Sites tool. So this is some way that I've used in my history class. I divide my students into groups, and I don't do this in class, although I'll be doing that in the fall. Thanks, Kelly, for that awesome idea. I will. What I've already done is I divide them into groups, and they get a question that they have to answer, and they answer it by creating a website, and it's a collaborative website. And I'm going to show you one of my sites. Let's see. So you see some of the questions here, like what are the limits of individualism? A question that we Americans have been asking ourselves.
Okay, great.
And then, but I'm going to pull up a site that does not have any real students listed in it. This is a default site, and what I do is I go to the share option, and I'm going to point out a difference between an apps domain and a non-apps domain here. With anything in Google, when you share, there we go, it's this change option. When you share, every Google account has these options to make something public on the web, which means it can be searched for, and then anyone can find it. A second option that we have is anyone with a link. And Kelly, I think yours is set up this way, the one that we're interacting in.
Yeah, the one that we're interacting in right now, anyone who has the link can edit.
Yeah,
so I don't know. I see all of the animal icons up at the top that represents people. And by the way, there's 29 people in the collaborative document.
That is really awesome, by the way.
Right, very cool.
Yeah, and folks, if you have questions and you're on Twitter, you can also ask questions via Twitter with the CCCLearn hashtag. And Kelly, I think you're keeping an eye on that. Are you?
I am. I don't see anything going on Twitter. I did add another slide to the collaborative document where they could post questions as well.
Okay. Terrific.
Great.
Love it.
So when I'm, again, with any Google account or any Google asset is the word I use, so whether it's a site, whether it's a presentation or a spreadsheet, whatever, you have these options here. The visibility option is public. Anyone can find it. Anyone with a link, so it's publicly available, but I have to give those, you know, I could email it to my students or whoever. Because we're in an apps domain, I have these additional options here. Anyone in Los Rios can find it. So once someone is logged into Los Rios Google, they could then go to the Sites tool, and there's a search. You can see the search field at the top of the page, and they could find this site. And then that final option there is people at Los Rios with a link. So this last option is pretty neat because I can say, you know, this is a class activity. I don't want this shared outside of the district.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to bother collecting all my list of students and putting into the box that I haven't shown you yet. That's for specific people. And so I can kind of set this option and say, okay, there it is, and give my students a link, right? I would post it via our learning management system, or I would email it to them. And then I know that the people who are within Los Rios, only people rather who are within Los Rios can access it.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So let's say Susan, who's within the Los Rios district, takes that link and sends it to someone outside, sends it to Sharon, who's outside the district. I mean, it's just a link. So she plugs it into her browser to view it. Can Sharon won't? She'll actually get a message that says you don't have permission to view this page.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Okay.
right. Yeah, because we have an apps domain, there's basically a wall set up between our our community of users, the thousands of students and employees are in that community, and excuse me, and then the entire internet. The example you shared, if I had that anyone with a link option chosen, then yes, she could take that email that I sent and she could forward it to anyone. They could click on it and open it. But within Los Rios, I can if I want to keep it within Los Rios, if she shares it with someone else, then they click on the link, they get prompted, what's your Los Rios username and password?
Right. So that would be true of anything, a Google Doc, a Google presentation, a Google spreadsheet, a Google site, anything that falls within the suite of tools included in your Google Apps domain.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
And then within each of these options I've talked about so far, so that's anyone or public, whatever, right? You have this choice down here, can they edit it or can they view it? So if I were to say can edit, so Kelly, I think what you've got for yours is anyone with the link, like as you said, can edit. Oh, I have can view turned. Oh, I see. I think so. Here's a good example. I'm learning something about our setup that I mentioned. I think before the control panel, there is a screen where our system administrators can decide which permissions our users have, and it looks like we have ours set up so that a Google site cannot be shared, cannot be given edit rights to anyone in the world.
I see.
Right. I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then finally, there's the specific people here. So one thing I'm going to mention here is if I go to specific people, let me hit cancel. So I'll go back to that. So you see that invite people box down there. Within Los Rios, I can type the name of an employee, and I'll go ahead and pick my wife, who's in the district here, and I can say, I want this person within Los Rios, and I can even make her the owner of this particular thing, and in which case if I were to hit the send button, she would get an email saying that she now owns the site. Within Los Rios, the way we have it set up is we have two different groups of users, right? We have employees and we have students. Two main differences between those groups. Number one is only our students have access to Gmail. Our employees still use Los Rios. We have Exchange, so we have Microsoft email. The second option here is if I were to share this with the students, again, this is a decision that we made in Los Rios, so it's not necessarily the same everywhere. If I were to share this with a student, I would have to type in the student's complete username with the domain at the end there, apps.losrios.edu. So this is, I think, again, it's local to Los Rios. The decisions could be made separately, but it is nice that you could type someone's name and so I'll type Johnson, and these are all the Johnsons we have. Again, these are all employees.
That's great. That makes it easier, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it adds a lot more functionality, and it just really kind of it brings the sharing down to more of a granular level, I think. Yeah, I can see how that could be really functional, really helpful within a teaching context. Very helpful. I'm glad that you showed that. Thank you for giving us that visual. That's really helpful. That's great. Terrific. So should I pass things over to Kelly? Because I know she's got some pretty cool stuff she wants to show us. Yeah? We're ready to do that? Thanks, Greg, for taking us through that. That was,
my pleasure.
Really informative. Oh, and hey, you know what? There was a question that Laura Lane asked a little while ago, and I was not trying to ignore you, Laura. Let me bring that up to Greg before we go over to Kelly. Laura had asked, does it need support by campus IT to administer?
Yes, it does. In our case, we already had the usernames. We already had a unified authentication system, right? So that same username password was being used for the student email system, the student record system, our learning management system, so it did require our IT staff to take that. We use LDAP authentication for those, for those of you for what that means. So we had that LDAP authentication system. There's a way to connect that with Google so that they would do that, but definitely did require our IT staff.
Okay, question. Great. And real quick, if you can just answer maybe in a minute, do the students have to have a Google? Do the students have to have a Google account?
They get one automatically. As
Right.
soon as someone registers, as soon as someone applies for admission to the district, they've got a Google account already, and or maybe they have to register for class. I'm not sure about that. But they get a Google account, they get a Gmail account. So a potential challenge is for the students who already have Google accounts. They're used to using Google. They're used to doing stuff in Google. Now they have this other Google account,
Right.
and it may be the same as any of us who provide email accounts for our students. A lot of our students already have their own personal email, so maybe our students are used to having multiple user accounts. There might be a little bit more confusion for students who have a Google account or Gmail account, and now they got the second one from Los Rios,
Right.
and which one do they use and all that. We provide help. We tell our students how to set up forwarding, so they can set up forwarding from Los Rios Gmail to other things, which is not that hard to do. But that is a good thing to think about.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks, Greg. Okay. Kelly, you're on.
All right. So I just wanted to, I'm actually going to screen share again and take you to that collaborative document. I hope that everybody had fun typing into it. I was able to see that we had about, what are we in right now? We've got 27 people in this collaborative document right now, all working on the exact same presentation. So this is what I got.
As anonymous users, we see, right?
Oh, yes, those are the anonymous users, and that's the big difference between what Greg was talking about. So when I do this in class, it's the same thing. It's anonymous users. So I don't know who's typing into what. Again, as you had said before, if you like to have a lot of control, this might freak you out a little bit. But I do know which group is responsible for which slide. And then you can also, if somebody wanted to mess with someone else's slide, I can actually go in revision history and back it up and get rid of the changes that they made. So I hope that everyone had fun seeing who was in different slides and who was typing into it. That's exactly what I do when I'm in class. So I set up the presentation ahead of time, I put them in the groups, and I designate which group has which slide, depending on what the topic is for that day. As I was telling Michelle the other day, I did one recently, and it was on STDs. I didn't want to give that to the audience today, but what I did was I went through each of them, and each of the group was responsible for explaining what that STD was, what the symptoms were, rather than me telling them all about it. So I got to see as each group is typing into the slide, and then I'm able to evaluate too which groups are working well and which ones aren't based on how much they're typing into it. So there may be a group that needs a little bit more assistance, and I'm able to actually see that by how much they're typing in. Once they're done putting all the information in the slides, then all I do is hit present, and it's directly up on and projected on our screens, and then they can easily present their slide to the class and the content that they wanted to teach to the class. So before, if I had them say, put them in groups and said, okay, create a PowerPoint slide, well then when they came up to present it, they would either have it on a thumb drive or they would email it. So now it's really seamless. It goes directly up. It doesn't waste any time. So the facilitation of it is really pretty easy. So I do love all the comments that we're getting in this collaborative presentation. So Greg, I don't know if you wanted to look at some of the advantages and disadvantages that were written in about the institutional Google Apps domain. For me, I don't have an institutional app or Google Apps domain for, I use it on an individual basis.
Kelly, I think,
I'm commenting right now actually on one of the questions, answering about the help we provide for students. That's
perfect.
A great question.
Kelly?
Yeah.
For the purpose of the archive and maybe someone who doesn't have the actual presentation in front of them, could you read what's on the screen? Because it's really tiny and it's not legible.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
So they were looking at some of the advantages of Google Apps as being cross-platform, that it's fast and easy, it's stable, that you can set documents, such as the one that we're doing right now, to be just to the institution and not to the world. I think that's a huge difference that Greg gets to do that I don't get to do. I have to put it out to the world. I can't just put it out to my Palomar students. Some disadvantages, limitations of editing and of graphics. Some other disadvantages that were listed were time and talent. Can you think of any other disadvantages of a apps domain, Greg?
Yeah, I think that it's, and I'll go ahead and add this, it can be confusing for users, and again, this is both students and instructors who already have Google experience, especially for those who use tools that are not included in the apps domain. And I'm not sure if this is how much of a disadvantage it is, but it sometimes can be a disadvantage when a single decision has to be made that affects an entire district. You know?
Oh, yeah.
Because whether the Google Apps domain, we pretty much are deciding whether a tool is available or not available, and then that is everyone. Everyone in the district either can or cannot use it as part of our domain. You could theoretically set up multiple groups, instructors who are really talented and happy with technology versus instructors who are less talented and happy. And then how many different groups would you have with different levels of privileges, right, within the tool? So there is that kind of there is to a certain extent a one-size-fits-all aspect to it, which we don't have in our individual accounts, right? Individually, I can decide to use a tool or not use a tool or whatever, and there's a lot more freedom in terms of the tools that I can use.
Oh, that was interesting. I hadn't even thought about that. So since I use an individual account, I have that freedom. So I'm able to use the tools that I want to use. So I actually, I love all these comments that are being put into the document. So some ideas for using a collaborative presentation was to have students actively ask their questions to lead the class where the students would like it to go. I love that idea. I think of that as maybe even being that icebreaker at the beginning of class. What questions do you have about this topic? With Spanish, it was another suggestion was to have students collaborate on a story or a cultural presentation of a country. Have small group collaboration link built into small group homepage of the LMS. Great idea as well. So there's lots of really good ideas in this on how to use this.
That's so
and
cool.
Then we added some other slides, just getting ideas on how people are using technology. So
can I also just add that I use this in my online class? So I just want to put a plug in and say that, by no means does this just have to be for face-to-face, because I use a collaborative Google presentation as an icebreaker in my online class, and the concept is my favorite photograph. It's a history of photography class, and it's set up like a photo exhibition, and I have every student just pick their favorite photograph, and it could be any photograph in the entire world, and they just have to insert it on a slide that I've labeled it with their name, so they find their slide with their name, put their photograph on it, and then they explain why it's their favorite. And then the students go through and they look at all the diversity of photographs that were chosen, and they learn about each other. And the following week they write a blog post about what they learned about photography and in photographic meaning, as well as what they learned about our community. And it works great. It's a great icebreaker, and we do it week 1 when everyone's really stressed and frantic, because it's super easy. It's low stake, really easy. Not a lot of technological skill involved. So I just wanted to say that use it for online too.
I love that idea of using that as your student introductions to build that class community. That is such a great idea. It made me think also, I have my students in the discussion board post an introduction and a picture of themselves, and you can almost do the same thing with this presentation that is always there, and it's easy to click through and see them. I use Google Forms for my introductions, and I have those embedded into Blackboard. So they complete a Google form, it goes directly into a spreadsheet that is also embedded in our LMS, and that way throughout the entire semester my students can go back and easily view our entire class community and get a better sense of who everybody is. But the presentation, making it more visual, that's a great idea.
Pictures are good.
Can I mention another, I'll say this and I'll try to type it in the thing as well. A nice advantage of using with forms is that if you have a domain, forms can be set up to record the username of the form submitter. So you could use this to do elections, and
wow!
And only one person, one vote, because it automatically records. In fact, you can even say that there's, I think you can say that there's a limit number that they can't submit the form more than once. In other words, so there is a that can be good and bad depending on your perspective, but there is a way that the ability to control who has access to stuff can also help with that form thing.
That's so interesting. I had no idea, because that would really assist with research and planning. If you wanted to do an institution-wide survey, that you could do it through forms and that it wouldn't allow multiple entries. That's really interesting.
So we're getting a couple of questions. Some of them are more involving the apps. I'm going to save the technical ones to the end, and we've got about 15 minutes left, so maybe we'll save the last 5 minutes to the for Q&A. But I was just going to answer Barbara's question real quick about what she's got one here for me. She says, how much time does it take to set up the slides with every student's name on them for the icebreaker? So you could think about having a PowerPoint in front of you and how much time it would take you to type my class is about 35 students, so type 35 student names on slides. I don't know, probably takes me 10, 15 minutes or so. Doesn't take me that long. And that's not a requirement for the class. That's just something I like to do. It's kind of like an extra personalization step. I think about it like setting my dinner table for my students. So it's totally not necessary, that step. I just like to do it. And by the way, then it's all in alphabetical order, and I'm kind of a control freak, so.
So
okay,
I was going to just real quick show how to actually set up a Google presentation. Does that sound good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Sure.
I know you can do that real quick, too.
Yeah, absolutely. Really quick. So what you're seeing right now is the homepage for my Google Drive. And so all I would do is go to Create, and then I click on Create Presentation. And then I just decide whatever the title is and what theme I want to use. So I'm just going to keep it on the white theme for now, and I'll hit OK. And I can always go back and change that anytime. And then I can just click the title, and I can just change it to whatever I want it to be. And then from here, then I'm going to add the slides. So usually what I do is they're very long URLs when you're in Google Docs, and so I usually create a tiny URL out of it so that it's much easier to give to the students so they can all get into it. If I don't do that, what I do is I just take the URL and then I paste it into Blackboard, and they're able to go to Blackboard and access it that way, is another way of doing it. And then I go through and I add slides for each group, and I really just type group 1, or I will to group 1 plus whatever the topic is or whatever the question is that I want them to answer. And so I first set this entire presentation up with all of the slides that I'm going to need, and then from there all I do is click on the share button in the upper right hand corner, and you just set it so that it is set to where anyone who has the link, and it defaults to can view, so you just need to change that to can edit, and then I hit save. And then after that, my students are able to type into it. So it's really, really quick.
I just wanted to point out there were 2 key steps there that Kelly took. I know she did that really fast, but it was, first of all, change it to anyone with the link, and then can edit. Because that second one, can edit, I've missed sometimes. I'll send it out and then people say, I can't type in it. So that bottom one defaults to can view, and you have to change that to can edit. Yeah, yes. That's key right there. And then you click save. Yeah, so those 2 steps and then save. Yeah.
Yeah, I do the same thing as you. I miss that one all the time. I'm usually good about clicking anyone with the link because I use that all the time, but I usually forget about the can edit. Yeah. So that's what I did to set up the collaborative presentation that everyone's typing into right now. And then kind of a last step, so after we've built this presentation and I want my students to be able to access it, I'll usually embed it into our LMS, into Blackboard, or I'll embed it into my blog. And these are really, really easy to embed. So if you wanted to do that after the fact and you wanted to actually put it into another website, you would just click on File, and then you go down to Publish to the Web. And then it will ask you, are you sure you want to start publishing? So you say yes, start publishing. And then it gives you the embed code. So all you would do here is that you would copy this embed code, and then if you're using, for me I use Blackboard. If I'm in a text box in Blackboard, I would click on the HTML button and I would paste this code into the HTML box, and then this presentation just, for me, I think of it as magic. It magically pops up in Blackboard or on my blog. So it's really easy to be able to share it with your students.
Yeah, and that works pretty much the same in most learning management systems. As long as you click on that HTML or source code button in the editing toolbar, that's what a lot of people miss. Yeah, that's a great thing to learn right there. So thanks for sharing that with us, Kelly. That's awesome. So Ricardo wanted a clarification on what the term we were using. We were referring to Google Forms, and he was unclear about whether or not we were saying forums or forms. So we were talking about Google Forms, and if you're not familiar with forms, they're like online surveys. And they can be used for so many different purposes. I create a student info form using Google Forms, and I embed it in my online classes, and my students it's a way for them each student to send information to me, and it goes into a spreadsheet. And I just ask them questions. Is there anything you want to share with me at this point in the semester? And I'll get stuff from my students. Most students say no. But every now and then, I'll get a student who'll say, "Oh, I'm pregnant and I'm going to deliver at week 9," or I'm a caregiver for severely disabled child, or these challenges that are in these circumstances that you don't know that your online students are dealing with, that are so important, because when you're looking at just analytics in an LMS, thinking what's going on with the student, right? And then you're able to go back and reference the spreadsheet, and what's going on behind the scenes. It just gives you a different context to what that student is dealing with, and I think that is really valuable to me when I start a class off, and I love that element of just using forms in that way. Yeah. So I really value that resource. It's something that I find really helpful. And let's see here. That's a response to that question there. And we had a couple of other questions that had come in that were a little bit more technical. Ricardo also asked, has anyone indicated concerns with LDAP authentication in regards to FERPA? People could be mining other people's emails. Do you know anything about that, Greg?
Yes, that's actually a big question, and the FERPA question is why in our district we don't have a lot of those other tools turned on, because of the now Google, with their educational users and that suite of core apps, Google promises, and they just reiterated that promise after a court case a couple of weeks ago. They promised not to mine that data, not to even look at it in aggregate, or not to do any metadata analysis. But they don't make that promise with those other the terms of service that are the commercial ones. So again, a blogger and those types of things. Because we have a contractual relationship with Google, we therefore assume that Google is abiding by the terms of the contract, and which of course that's what we do with our LMS. That's what we do with our with any organization that we do contracts with, or for that matter, even with our employees, that we're trusting them not to share data illegally, or not to do anything illegal with the data. And that's kind of a nice advantage as well of like the Google Sites tool, for example. Or Google Docs, I would feel comfortable if I shared a Google Doc with an individual student. I could have my students, instead of giving me a Word document or a whatever, I could say, create your paper in Google Docs and share it with me, and give me edit rights or give me comment rights, and then I could give the student feedback directly on their Google Doc, instead of doing that via the LMS or doing it on paper. And I would feel comfortable doing that because and not violating FERPA, because it's all we have that relationship with Google. Mm-hmm. So that's a great question.
And there's some just to mention that if you haven't used Google Docs, for some of you watching, if you haven't used Google Docs lately, there's been some really fabulous add-ons that have been integrated into Google Docs. And one of the things, if you go to the top, you'll see a little button that says Add-Ons, and you can search in there. And there's some new tools you can add into Google Docs. And one of them, I can't recall the name of it, but it actually allows you to record feedback into a document using voice. So there's some really neat features that, from a teaching perspective, come along with using Docs, aside from all the other things that we've mentioned here. And and I think that that I always look for ways that you can add a humanizing element. And when I saw that, I thought, ooh, that kind of makes me want to start using docs more now, for some of the writing projects. And so that made me think, I really wish I had the apps integration, because I think that makes that sharing between students much more nuanced and easier. So I think that's important to point out too. Some of those newer integrations that have happened and add-ons are pretty cool. And Dan has asked, does Google let you know when there's an update to some of its apps, changes to Gmail, for example?
Yeah, sorta, kinda. I will say that I often find out about changes from media. I subscribe to some. News feeds, newspapers, whatever that deal with technology news. I'm also a member of like a subscriber to Google's apps blog, so I get emails from Google when they're making changes. And then also they'll make changes inside the apps, and they will just pop up and they'll say, hey, welcome to the new version of Sheets. This is what's, either new formulas or new this or new whatever, and Google will let their users for a limited amount of time stick with the old version if they want. I will say that is, I think this is a bigger, broader issue in terms of all the technology that we deal with, that the technology providers, when they make changes to stuff, whether it's the browsers, whether it's the LMS providers, or if it's software providers like Google, they don't always stop to consider the academic calendar and whether or not we are ready to make those changes in the middle of a semester. And that, again, with Google is a good example. With our LMS, we can decide not to apply an update probably, which in our district we don't until it's between terms. But with Google Apps, they could make a change, and most of the time the changes are minor, but it might require, like if I tell my students, these are the directions I gave you on day one of the class, and then midway through Google changes something, and there's some little, click here instead of click there to do the same thing. There is a risk in that, but again, I think that's something that any technology would have.
Great. Okay, thanks for that. And let's see, Ricardo's got a question for me. He's asking, does Google Hangouts allow you to place the lower third graphics on my screen? So my graphics are looking a little crazy today. I think I have way too much going on. I think you're talking about all this fun stuff I have going on my screen here. I actually did not create this in Google Plus and Hangouts. I created all the stuff you see here in a web-based tool called PicMonkey.com, PicMonkey.com. It's a picture editing tool. I created it without an account, and you go to PicMonkey.com, you click on Edit a Picture, and then what you need to do is turn on the transparent background. That is key. And then it lets you you can start putting on all kinds of like stickers and banners and put text in your banners, and it'll take way too much time, but and then you can download it to your computer, and it saves as the solid image areas save as solid image, and then the background's transparent, and as long as you save it as 1280 by 720 to your computer, which is the same dimension as a Google Hangout, you can upload it as an overlay in Google Hangout. So you click on overlay, and then you upload the file from your computer, and it appears. Got all that? I should write a blog post on that. That'd be a good one.
Yeah, I was wondering how you made that. I thought that you made it in the Hangout.
I know. One of those, I don't know how I get myself into these crazy scenarios. And this is the last question we're going to take because we're out of time. So it's coming from Diane Little. Hi, Diane. Thanks for joining us again. She's asking, this one's for you, Kelly. When the presentation is embedded in the LMS, do the students still need the URL to access it?
No, they don't.
Yeah, so because it's a picture, right?
Exactly. It looks like it's just a slideshow that's in the LMS, so they don't need the URL anymore. So, for instance, I build all of my syllabi in Google Drive now, and I embed them into Blackboard. That way, when I realize that I made a typo, I can just go to the doc and change it really quick, and it automatically changes the one that's embedded in Blackboard. I felt like that was teacher cheating. It saved me so much time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So, Diane, if you're watching this Hangout on the Google event page, that's a video embedded in the event page. So you can think about the presentation being embedded in Blackboard. Same thing, same concept. It's an object that gets embedded in a website. plop it in there. That's a non-technical term for embedding. So, okay, well, this has been fabulous, and I do need to let everyone know before we sign off that this is the last Center Hangout for spring term. So the Center is going on summer vacation, and I hope you all are too, and I hope you have a great summer, everyone. So don't stop the learning. We have some amazing archives available in the Center playlist. They're all available on the @ONE YouTube channel, and if you sign up to be a member, this is always the hardest part of the Hangout. If you sign up to be a member, right here is the URL of the Center, tiny.cc/the Center. If you go there, that's our Google Plus community page. And over on the right side of that page, you will see it says About This Community, and that's where you'll find a link to our archives. And that's a great thing to check out this summer, because I bet there's some Hangouts you missed, and there's lots of stuff in there to learn from. So check out some of those great Hangout videos, share them with your peers, and keep the learning going, and post some updates in the Center community. Let us know what you're doing over summer, because you know teachers don't really take the summer off. We all know that we keep learning. So let's stay connected and share what you're doing, and that would be great. And I'd like to really thank Greg and Kelly for being here. You shared some great information with us all. It's so wonderful to have people who are willing to take time out and share. So thank you so much for your generosity.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
You too.